What if one night, just as you are about to close your eyes, you hear a faint whisper carried on the wind? It says, "Would you dare to step into a world where laughter was sacred? Donkeys were holy, and skeletons danced under the moonlight." Before we wander together into this strange story, take just a few seconds, like the blink of an eye, to hit the like button. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from. And subscribe to the channel. Only do it if you are truly ready to dive into something bizarre. Now, let us begin. Imagine walking through a medieval town square. The air is thick with smoke from torches, the sour sweet smell of ale, and the chatter of peasants wearing patched tunics. You think you have stumbled upon a regular fare, maybe some jugglers, maybe a pig being roasted on a spit, but then you see it, the priest is standing on a cart, wearing his robe backward, making faces like a clown. Children shriek with laughter, grown men roll on the ground, and women clap as if the world itself had turned upside down. You rub your eyes because this is not what the Middle Ages in your history books ever described. And that is exactly the truth. The Middle Ages were not just knights and castles, or grim battles of plague and famine. Hidden between those lines were festivals so absurd, so hilarious, and sometimes so disturbing that you would wonder if humanity had temporarily gone insane. And yet, every one of these rituals carried meaning. Some were to mock power, some to release tension, some to flirt with death, and some to celebrate life in ways only the imagination of the Middle Ages could invent. Now, if you were to step into one of these festivals, would you laugh, would you run, or would you simply hide behind a mask and pray no one noticed you? Because tonight, we will travel together through time, uncovering 25 festivals that once lit up medieval Europe like a carnival of the strange. But first, let us set the scene. The medieval mind was not like yours. To them, the world was a theater where heaven and hell constantly fought for dominance. Every sickness, every crop failure, every sudden death was explained by unseen forces, spirits, witches, saints, demons. And festivals were the stage where people tried to negotiate with those forces. Sometimes they begged, sometimes they mocked, sometimes they laughed in the face of terror. Because what else can you do when you fear the dark so much that you start dancing with skeletons? Picture this, a town where every January, instead of singing hymns, the choir belts out farmyard animal noises. Imagine a bishop dressed as a donkey, braying from the pulpit. It sounds like a Monty Python skit, does not it? But it was real, and it happened in churches that today would make you gasp in disbelief. These were not festivals for tourists or polite dinner table stories. They were messy, loud, chaotic, and sometimes violent. People got drunk. Priests lost their dignity, and animals were paraded like royalty. It was a time when the rules bent backward, where the peasant could be king, and the nobleman could be mocked in front of the crowd. Think of it as a medieval version of a comedy roast, only the joke was society itself. The question is, why would people who lived under such strict religious laws risk angering God with donkey parades and skeleton dances? The answer lies in balance. Humans needed release. When life was all labor, hunger, and fear of eternal damnation, festivals offered a moment to breathe, to laugh, to poke fun at power. Even the church, though often scandalized, sometimes allowed these celebrations, because without them the people might explode. And now, you are standing there in the middle of that crowd, smelling the sweat, hearing the crackle of torches, watching the absurd unfold before your very eyes. You are not just a listener tonight, you are part of the audience centuries ago. As the music swells and the jesters begin their play, you realize you are about to witness stories that are both hilarious and haunting, ridiculous and revealing. So are you ready? Take my hand, figuratively of course, and let us step into the first bizarre celebration, where fools wear crowns and wisdom hides behind laughter. You might think the medieval church was always solemn, echoing with chants, and filled with the smell of incense. But once a year, in certain corners of Europe, something unbelievable happened. The very people who preached order and discipline, the priests, the bishops, the choir, turned the sacred into comedy. They called it the Feast of Fools. Close your eyes and imagine walking into a cathedral in January. Instead of Gregorian chants, you hear squeals, whistles, and laughter bouncing off the stone walls. The choir is not singing hymns but barking like dogs, meowing like cats, or braying like donkeys. The bishop, instead of standing tall in his golden mitre, has his robe on backward, a chicken feather stuck in his cap, and he is pretending to stumble like a drunken fool. The congregation is not shocked. They are roaring with laughter, clapping, even joining in the animal chorus. At the heart of this festival was inversion. The world flipped upside down. Those who usually lectured the masses became the clowns. Sacred texts were mocked. Sermons were parodied, and sometimes the altar itself was turned into a stage for ridicule. Even the holiest ceremonies could be twisted into absurd theater. Now you may wonder, why would the church, so powerful and strict, allow this? The answer is both simple and complicated. People lived in a world of rigid hierarchy. Kings ruled nobles, nobles ruled peasants, and priests ruled everyone's soul. Without a release valve, the pressure of that hierarchy could boil over. So once a year, the system permitted chaos. For a few hours, peasants laughed at priests, and priests laughed at themselves. Think of it like Mardi Gras meets Saturday Night Live, but performed in a Gothic cathedral with a side of donkey braying. One chronicler described priests leaping and dancing through the church aisles, juggling and even tossing dice on the altar. Some dressed as women. Some smeared their faces with ashes, and others wore grotesque masks that would look right at home at a modern Halloween party, if you were there. Would you laugh along, or would you nervously glance at the heavens, wondering if lightning was about to strike? It was not just humor, though. Beneath the laughter lurked a deeper truth. The festival mocked authority itself by making priests fools. People reminded themselves that no human was above folly. It was a dangerous message, but one the church tolerated, until eventually it did not. By the 15th century, bishops began banning the Feast of Fools, declaring it blasphemous, but the people resisted, because once you have tasted the joy of mocking power, you do not give it up easily. There is also a psychological twist here. Imagine living with constant fear of hellfire. Imagine sermons filled with threats of damnation. The Feast of Fools gave people one day to laugh at fear itself, to giggle at demons, to mock death, to pretend even Satan was ridiculous. For a medieval villager, that laughter was not just fun, it was survival. And yet, as bizarre as it seems, versions of this spirit survive today. When you watch comedians mock politicians on late-night shows, or when carnivals parade grotesque floats lampooning authority, you are seeing the ghost of the Feast of Fools. It reminds us that humans always need one day to flip the script, to turn the serious into the absurd, to laugh at the very structures that control them. So picture it again, the stone cathedral filled not with solemnity but with laughter, priests juggling apples, bishops meowing, the choir barking like a kennel. The faithful doubled over in joy, knowing tomorrow would be serious again. But tonight the fools wore crowns, and here's the question for you. If you were given one day to mock any authority in your life, your boss, your government, even your own fears, how far would you go? Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the sound of rattling bones echoing across a moonlit square. Drums beat like a heartbeat, flutes screech, and suddenly figures painted as skeletons begin to sway and leap, pulling villagers into a dance that feels both terrifying and irresistible. This was not a Halloween party. This was the Danse Macabre, the Dance of the Dead, a medieval festival that blurred the line between life and death. In the Middle Ages, death was everywhere. Plague, famine, war, and childbirth itself claimed lives with brutal regularity. People did not hide from it the way we often do today. Instead, they faced death head-on, sometimes with fear, sometimes with reverence, and sometimes with mockery. The Dance of the Dead was their way of laughing in the face of the inevitable, reminding everyone that kings and peasants, bishops and beggars, would all end up in the same bony embrace. Imagine being pulled by the hand into a circle where skeletons danced beside living villagers. Some wore skull masks carved from wood, others painted their faces white with black hollows for eyes, and some strapped real bones to their clothes so they clattered with every step. The music was wild, uneven, almost designed to make you lose your footing. You would stumble, laugh nervously, then realize you were dancing with death itself. But the meaning ran deeper than mere theater. Artists, priests, and poets of the time used the Dance of the Dead as a reminder of mortality. No matter your wealth, no matter your pride, the grave would come. In murals painted on church walls, skeletons dragged popes, emperors, maidens, and farmers alike into their eternal waltz. The message was clear. Death unites us all. For the audience, though, there was a thrill. To dance with skeletons was to cheat fear, even for a night. To stomp on the cobblestones, to sing along with shrieking pipes. was to claim, "We know we will die, but tonight we are alive." That strange blend of terror and joy gave the festival its bizarre magic. Now, if you had been there, would you have joined the dance, or would you have stayed in the shadows, watching skeletons twirl villagers under the torchlight, afraid they might pull you into their circle too? Psychologists today might say the festival was a coping mechanism. It gave people power over what they feared most. Laughter, music, and mockery became weapons against despair. And in a world where the Black Death could sweep away entire towns, who could blame them for needing a little defiance? There were even accounts of dancers falling into trances, claiming they saw spirits or felt their ancestors pulling them along. Some collapsed from exhaustion. Some fainted, and some swore that death itself whispered secrets in their ears. Whether you believe in spirits or not, you can imagine how powerful it must have been to see your whole village, young and old, stomping and twirling in a carnival of mortality. And here's a thought. If such a dance were held today, would you dare to join? Would you paint your face, strap bones to your chest, and whirl until you forgot where life ended and death began? Picture this. You enter a church on a frosty January morning, expecting solemn hymns and incense. Instead, you see a donkey draped in cloth like royalty, slowly paraded down the aisle. The congregation does not gasp, they cheer. The priest blesses the animal, and when the service ends, the entire crowd brays like donkeys in unison. Welcome to the festival of the ass. Strange as it sounds, this medieval festival was real. It celebrated the donkey role in biblical stories, carrying the Virgin Mary into Egypt, bearing Christ into Jerusalem, and serving humbly throughout sacred history. But the Middle Ages had a knack for turning reverence into comedy. The donkey was not only honored, it was imitated, mocked, and adored all at once. Imagine villagers, half drunk from mulled wine, trying to outbray each other in church. Hee-haw, echoed under vaulted ceilings where solemn chants usually rose. Children tugged on the donkey tail, women threw flowers, and men stumbled around pretending to be beasts of burden. The holiest space became a barnyard. And for one day, nobody cared. Why the donkey? Because it symbolized humility, patience, and service. But also because it was funny. There is nothing like hearing a bishop, in full vestments, leading his congregation in donkey noises. Chroniclers wrote of priests ending prayers not with amen, but with a loud hee-haw. Can you imagine standing there, trying to keep a straight face, while your neighbors brayed at the altar? Yet beneath the humor was meaning. The donkey reminded people that even the lowliest creature had a place in God's story. It was a lesson in humility, wrapped in absurdity. In a world obsessed with rank and order, the donkey became a sacred trickster, turning pride upside down. Still, the church grew uneasy. What began as devotion often descended into drunken revelry. Some services ended with brawls, others with broken pews. And eventually bishops cracked down. But not before the tradition left its mark on medieval culture, a reminder that even religion had room, however briefly, for laughter. Now ask yourself, if you had walked into that church, would you have joined the braying chorus, or stood in the corner shaking your head? And deeper still, do not we all sometimes need to celebrate the humble, the ridiculous, the overlooked, just to remind ourselves that life is more than solemn rituals? So next time you see a donkey, picture it not as a stubborn farm animal, but as a medieval saint for a day, crowned with flowers, blessed at the altar, and cheered on with laughter that rattled stone walls. Now imagine standing on a narrow Venetian bridge in the late Middle Ages. The air smells of salt water and smoke, lanterns flicker across canals, and figures in masks glide silently past you. A woman in a white mask with red lips leans close and whispers a joke. A man in black cloak and long-nosed mask slips away into the shadows. No one knows who anyone really is. This was the seed of the Carnival of Venice. In a world ruled by status, masks became liberation. Nobles, merchants, even servants could mingle without titles. Behind a mask you could flirt with someone forbidden, gamble without shame, mock your betters, or reveal your deepest fears in riddles and songs. For a night, identity dissolved, and the city turned into a stage of mystery. The earliest Venetian carnivals were wild affairs. Drums and flutes echoed off marble walls, fireworks burst above St. Mark's Square, and gondolas full of masked revelers drifted along the canals. Imagine hundreds of strangers, faces hidden, laughing, shouting, whispering secrets. You would not know if the beggar beside you was a duke. or if the duke beside you was a thief. Of course, masks were not only for fun, they carried symbolism. The white Bauta mask represented purity but also concealment, the long-nosed Medico della Peste mask, later known as the Plague Doctor, was both protective and terrifying, like a bird of death watching from the shadows. Even simple cloth masks held power. They allowed you to be someone else, or no one at all. And with anonymity came danger. Behind masks, crimes were easier. Lovers met in secret, plots were whispered, rivalries settled in alleyways. Authorities tried to regulate who could wear masks, when and where, but the people resisted. For them, Carnival was freedom itself. If you walked those streets, how would you feel? Excited by the mystery, or anxious, knowing anyone could be hiding behind painted porcelain? Would you dare to confess a secret to a masked stranger, never knowing their true face? The Carnival of Venice grew so famous that it survived long after the Middle Ages, evolving into one of the world's grandest festivals. But its origin lies in this medieval hunger. The desire to escape roles, to dissolve into anonymity, to laugh and love and sin without consequence, at least until dawn. Tonight, as you imagine those masks, ask yourself, what mask would you wear if no one could judge you? And what truth would you finally reveal? Close your eyes and picture a village square in the Middle Ages. Long wooden tables sag under the weight of bread, roasted meat, wheels of cheese, and barrels of ale. At first it seems like a feast, but suddenly a man picks up a loaf of bread and hurls it across the square. A woman grabs a roasted chicken and flings it back. Children shriek with laughter, men join in, and before you know it, the feast has turned into a battlefield of flying food. This was no accident. It was the food-throwing festival. Though it sounds like a college food fight, this tradition carried meaning. In a world where hunger was constant, the act of wasting food was shocking, almost sacrilegious. Yet once a year, villagers gave themselves permission to rebel against scarcity by throwing bread instead of hoarding it. They mocked famine. By wasting abundance, they summoned luck for the harvest to come. The energy was contagious. Imagine ducking to avoid a wheel of cheese or shielding yourself from splattering stew. The air smelled of garlic, grease, and spilled ale. You could not stay clean. Even the most serious elder ended up with cabbage leaves stuck in his hair. The point was not destruction. It was release. For a few hours, order collapsed, laughter reigned, and hunger itself was symbolically defeated. Some historians suggest the festival had pagan roots, a ritual of sacrifice disguised as chaos. Others see it as a parody of feasting nobles. Peasants mocking the upper class by hurling their own abundance in exaggerated waste. Either way, it became a cathartic ritual, remembered for both absurdity and joy. Of course, danger lurked in the fun. A thrown loaf could bruise, a flying bone could cut, and sometimes fights escalated. Chroniclers note that in some towns, officials tried to regulate what foods could be thrown. Soft bread, yes; chicken bones, no. But rules rarely held. Once the spirit of chaos began, there was no stopping it. If you had been there, would you have joined the frenzy? Would you have grabbed a handful of porridge and splattered it across a rival's face? Or cowered under the table until the madness passed? Either way, you would have remembered it for life. And strangely enough, echoes of this survive today. Think of tomato festivals in Spain, or Holi in India, where color replaces food, ritualized chaos that lets people laugh. Forget rules and embrace mess as joy. The medieval food fights were their ancestors, crude and greasy, but alive with the same human need to rebel through laughter. So next time you see food wasted in jest, imagine it not as disrespect, but as an ancient charm against hunger. For one wild day in the Middle Ages, bread was not survival, it was ammunition. Imagine a village where the bells ring not for prayer but for drinking. Instead of solemn hymns, mugs clink, barrels roll, and wine spills across the cobblestones. At the center of it all is a statue of a saint, except on this day, the saint is dressed with a garland of grapes, a cup of ale placed in his stone hand. Welcome to what some chroniclers called the Feast of the Drunken Saint. Yes, you heard that right, a holy figure celebrated not with silence or fasting, but with intoxication. The ritual was both absurd and symbolic. Villagers believed that by drinking themselves into laughter, they honored the joy of creation. Some even claimed saints themselves must have laughed and feasted in heaven. So why not join them on earth? Picture it, peasants staggering arm in arm singing bawdy songs that echoed through the night, ale sloshed from wooden mugs, wine poured until the streets ran red. Even priests sometimes joined, though officially they disapproved. Chroniclers noted men collapsing in barns, women dancing barefoot in fountains, and children sneaking sips with wide grins. The line between sacred and profane blurred until no one could tell the difference. Why would such a festival exist in a deeply religious world? Because alcohol was central to medieval life. Water was often unsafe, but ale and wine, brewed and fermented, were safer and tastier. Drinking together was a way to build community, ease hardship, and yes, to forget the weight of mortality for a night. By framing it as devotion, villagers gave themselves permission to indulge without shame. But make no mistake, it was not just fun. Drunkenness carried meaning. To lose control was to step outside the rigid order of daily life. To see even the saint smiling with grapes around his neck was to believe that joy, laughter, and chaos were part of the divine plan. Of course, the church eventually cracked down. Bishops denounced the feast, claiming it mocked the dignity of saints. Edicts were issued. Punishments threatened. But traditions are hard to kill, and echoes of the drunken saint lived on in tavern songs, village fairs, and the simple truth that humans will always raise a glass to something higher, whether to God, luck, or simply each other. Now, if you had been there, mug in hand, would you have toasted the saint with laughter, or worried you were one sip away from blasphemy? The fire crackles in the village square. Torches light up the night, and shadows dance across wooden walls. Suddenly, a group of figures emerges. Faces hidden behind grotesque masks, clothes stuffed with straw, bells jingling from their belts. They stomp, they sing, they shout nonsense rhymes. The crowd cheers, tosses coins, and sometimes jeers. These were the mummers, the wandering performers of the Middle Ages, and their wild plays were unlike anything you have seen on Netflix. Mumming was both theater and chaos. Performers went door to door, bursting into homes uninvited, acting out crude skits with exaggerated fights, mock deaths, and ridiculous resurrections. Imagine someone dressed as a knight being stabbed by a kitchen broom, collapsing dramatically, only to leap up again when sprinkled with beer. The message was part entertainment, part ritual, death and rebirth, fortune and folly. Masks were central. Some were painted wood, others stitched from cloth, others terrifying leather faces with horns and fangs behind them. Villagers shed their identity and became tricksters, demons, or fools. The anonymity gave freedom. A servant could mock his master, a woman could flirt openly, a child could curse like an old drunkard. No one knew who was who, and that made it deliciously dangerous. For the audience, it was thrilling. You never knew what would happen when the mummers arrived. They might bless your home or steal your chicken. They might perform a body love scene in your kitchen, or set up a mock trial in your yard. For a night, your quiet cottage became a stage, and you were part of the play, whether you liked it or not. Why did people tolerate such madness? Because the plays carried meaning. Many mumming traditions were tied to the seasons, especially winter solstice. By acting out death and resurrection, villagers symbolically called for the return of the sun and the harvest. The chaos was not random. It was a ritual of survival, dressed in comedy. But let us be honest, it was also fun. Picture a drunk villager dressed as a dragon made of barrels, chasing children who screamed with laughter. Imagine two knights dueling with cabbages as weapons. Or a mummer pretending to be a priest, delivering a sermon made entirely of chicken clucks. It was comedy, chaos, and catharsis all rolled into one. Authorities sometimes tried to ban mumming, calling it indecent and disruptive. Yet it survived because people loved it. Even kings sometimes hired mummers for court entertainment, where the same crude humor that delighted peasants made nobles laugh until wine spilled from their noses. Humor, after all, is universal. Now think about it. If a group of masked strangers barged into your living room tonight, demanding you laugh, sing, or pay them in beer, how would you react, terrified or secretly thrilled? Mumming may sound alien, but echoes remain. Street performers, Halloween trick-or-treaters, even flash mobs, they all carry the spirit of medieval mummers. They remind us that sometimes life needs a little interruption, a little wild theater to jolt us out of routine, so the next time you see someone in costume making a fool of themselves in public, remember, they are part of a tradition that once turned entire villages into chaotic theaters under the winter stars. Picture this, the great hall of a medieval castle, lit by torches filled with the smell of roasted meat and spiced wine. Nobles sit in their velvet robes. Knights polish their swords, and at the far end stands a throne, but tonight it is not the king who sits upon it. Instead, a shabby peasant, patched clothes and muddy boots, wears the crown. The crowd roars with laughter. Welcome to the tradition of the mock king. In many medieval festivals, hierarchy flipped upside down. A beggar could become king for a day, a fool could command knights, the poorest man in the village might sit on the throne, issue absurd decrees, and watch as nobles were forced to obey. It was a carnival of reversal, a reminder that power was fragile, and laughter could dethrone even the mightiest. Imagine the scene. The king orders knights to cluck like chickens. He commands nobles to serve him wine, bowing low as if he were their true ruler. The hall shakes with laughter as lords trip over themselves carrying trenchers of food, while the peasant king burps loudly, declaring it royal law. For a brief, intoxicating moment, the world is inverted. But there was more than comedy here. The Mock King Festival had roots in Roman Saturnalia, when slaves were treated as masters for a time. The tradition survived because it served a purpose. It released tension. In a world of crushing inequality, the poor needed to taste power, and the rich needed to laugh at themselves. By acting out the absurdity of kingship, society acknowledged the truth everyone secretly knew. That rule was theater as much as divine right. Of course, the church and nobility sometimes bristled. The mock king mocked not only authority but also the idea that kings ruled by God's will. If a fool could be king, what did that say about real kings? Some rulers banned the practice. Others embraced it, perhaps nervously, as a way to keep the peace. Better to let people laugh at a fake king for a night than to question the real one. Think about it. If tomorrow you were crowned ruler of your world, your office, your city, your country, what ridiculous laws would you pass? Free pizza on Fridays, naps every afternoon in the Middle Ages. Peasants did exactly that. They turned fantasy into farce, laughing at both their dreams and their oppressors. The mock king tradition reminds us that power is never absolute. It exists only as long as people agree to play along. Strip away the robes and the crown, and a king is just another man. For one wild night in a medieval hall, that truth was impossible to ignore. So the next time you see a comedian impersonating a president, or a parody skit mocking the powerful, remember, it is the echo of a peasant on a throne belching out royal decrees, while the nobles laughed and obeyed. Imagine a courtroom in the Middle Ages. Judges in robes sit behind heavy wooden tables, scribes sharpen quills, and a crowd gathers to watch. But instead of a thief or a murderer, the accused is a pig. Yes, a real pig, squealing, tied with rope, standing before the court as if it understood the charges. Welcome to the bizarre world of animal trials. It may sound like satire, but animal trials truly happened across medieval Europe. Cats, dogs, pigs, goats, even insects were summoned to court. They were charged with crimes: pigs accused of killing children, rats accused of stealing grain, locusts accused of destroying crops, and just like humans, they were given defense lawyers to argue their case. Picture the absurdity: a solemn lawyer addressing a judge, saying, "My client, the rat, could not possibly have eaten all the grain, for he is but one creature among many." Or a priest solemnly excommunicating a swarm of beetles, commanding them to leave the fields under threat of divine punishment. For the crowd, it was theater mixed with law, a ritual where humans pretended the natural world obeyed their courts. But behind the comedy was fear. In the Middle Ages, animals were not just livestock. They were neighbors, workers, even threats. A pig could feed a family, but also kill a child with a bite. Rats carried disease. Locusts brought famine. By putting them on trial, people projected order onto chaos. It was a way to say, even nature must answer to human law. Sentences could be brutal. Pigs were sometimes hanged in the village square, dressed in clothes like criminals. Dogs were drowned, cows executed. Insects cursed. And yes, people actually attended these punishments as public spectacles, half horrified, half entertained. Still, not all trials ended in death. In some cases, the animals were acquitted. Records survive of defense lawyers convincing judges that the accused beasts were innocent, or at least not solely responsible. In one famous trial, rats were excused for failing to appear in court because the roads were dangerous due to cats. The courtroom erupted in laughter, but the verdict was taken seriously. If you had lived then, how would you have felt watching a pig hanged for murder, outraged at the waste, or relieved, believing justice, however strange, restored balance to the village? To modern eyes, it is absurd. But in a world without science, it was a way to cope. Blaming animals for disaster gave people control. Trials turned misfortune into a narrative, where guilt was assigned and order restored. And perhaps deep down, it allowed humans to laugh at their fears by turning even justice into theater. Today, when you see cartoons of animals in suits, or children's stories of talking beasts judged by their peers, you are glimpsing a shadow of this medieval tradition. It is both ridiculous and haunting, a reminder that humanity has always struggled to tame the wild, even with the tools of law. So next time you hear someone say, "That is a kangaroo court," remember, once upon a time, the court really did try animals, and sometimes the animals almost won. Picture a summer night in the Middle Ages. The fields lie dark under the stars, and villagers gather around a massive bonfire stacked high with wood. The flames roar to life, sparks whirl into the sky, and the crowd begins to circle, singing, clapping, and stomping their feet. Then, one by one, they leap through the fire. Yes, men, women, even children, racing across the flames as if the fire itself were a gate to another world. Welcome to the fire dances. To us it might seem reckless, but for medieval people, jumping through fire was not madness, it was survival magic. They believed flames cleansed the body, burned away sickness, and scared off demons. Couples leapt together to bless their love. Farmers carried torches around their fields to ward off blight. Children were passed over the smoke to protect them from illness. Fire was not just heat and light, it was medicine, prayer, and shield all at once. Imagine the thrill, your heart pounding as you approach the blaze, heat licking your skin, the crowd chanting your name. You leap for a split second suspended in firelight, and land on the other side to cheers. For that moment, you feel invincible. The fire dances often took place on midsummer nights or festivals like St. John's Eve. They were tied to the sun's power, marking the longest days of the year. By lighting bonfires, villagers symbolically strengthened the sun, ensuring crops would ripen and darkness would not overwhelm. It was both cosmic theater and communal joy. Of course, there were risks. Robes caught fire, hair singed, and sometimes leapers fell short. Chroniclers mention accidents, but they also note that the injuries were accepted as the price of magic. Better a burned sleeve than a cursed harvest. Beyond superstition, though, the fire dances had another role. They bonded communities. When the whole village gathered to face the flames together, fears melted into laughter. Imagine neighbors holding hands, jumping side by side, forgetting debts and grudges. For one night, the fire burned not just wood, but the walls between people. And let us be honest, it was fun. Who would not want to leap across a bonfire while friends cheered? Even today, echoes remain. Fire festivals in Spain, torchlit processions in Scotland, fireworks on midsummer nights. The medieval villagers would recognize the spirit immediately. Now here's the question. If you stood before that roaring bonfire, would you leap? Would you trust the flames to cleanse and protect you? Or would you step back, content to watch others take the fiery plunge? Picture a meadow outside a medieval village. The moon is full, drums echo in the distance, and villagers gather in a wide circle around a tall wooden pole wrapped with flowers and ribbons. Men and women clasp hands, weaving in and out as they dance, laughter and singing rising into the night air. Some call it a celebration of the earth. Others whisper it is about something more primal, fertility. Welcome to the world of fertility rites. In the Middle Ages, survival depended on two things: fertile land and fertile families. Crops had to grow and children had to be born. Without them, villages withered. So fertility rites blurred the line between farming and desire. People believed that by celebrating passion, they could bless the soil. By honoring the harvest, they could awaken love and life within themselves. The most famous symbol was the maypole, tall, phallic, wrapped with flowers and ribbons, a literal and symbolic marriage of earth and sky. Couples danced around it, weaving patterns that represented union, renewal, and abundance. For some, it was innocent joy. For others, it carried a wink of mischief, an unspoken acknowledgement of sexuality hidden beneath the ritual. But fertility rites went beyond dancing. In some villages, people leapt over fires to bless their future marriages. In others, newlyweds spent their wedding night in fields, seeding the soil with their union. There were even tales of processions carrying symbols of male and female power, plows and loaves of bread, horns and flowers, paraded together as living metaphors. Imagine yourself there, surrounded by torchlight and laughter. Perhaps you are asked to tie a ribbon on the maypole, or to sing a song of love while farmers chant blessings for wheat and barley. The air is thick with the mingling of human desire and agricultural hope. It is at once awkward, funny, and strangely moving. The church, unsurprisingly, frowned upon such rites. Priests condemned them as pagan remnants, too sensual, too wild, but the people clung to them, because they spoke to something deeper than doctrine. The simple truth that life comes from union, whether of seed and soil or man and woman. Some historians argue that fertility rites gave people a way to talk about love and sex in a culture that otherwise silenced such topics. Wrapped in ritual, laughter, and symbolism, desire could be expressed without shame. It was safe, even holy, to laugh, flirt, and play when it was for the crops. If you stood in that circle, would you dance with abandon, laughing as ribbons tangled around the pole, or would you blush, uneasy with the blatant symbolism? Either way, you would understand why these rites mattered. They were a promise that life would go on, that wheat would ripen, babies would cry, and joy would return with the seasons. So the next time you see a maypole dance at a summer fair, remember, beneath the flowers and ribbons lies a tradition older than history itself, where harvest and desire once danced as one. Imagine waking up in a medieval village to find that everyone is laughing. Not just smiling politely, but roaring, chuckling, giggling until their ribs ache. The blacksmith hammers iron while telling jokes. The baker delivers bread with a grin so wide it looks painful, and children run through the streets laughing so hard they fall in the dust. On this day, sorrow was forbidden. Welcome to the laughing day. The tradition, recorded in scattered chronicles, was simple but powerful. For one day each year, the village dedicated itself to joy. Grim talk of famine, war, or plague was silenced. Tears were outlawed. Even priests joined in, delivering sermons laced with jokes and puns. If you frowned, neighbors teased you until you cracked a smile. Why? Because laughter was believed to have power. In a world where sickness and death lurked everywhere, laughter was medicine for the soul. Villagers thought it could drive away evil spirits, heal sadness, and even bless the harvest. They treated laughter not as frivolous noise, but as sacred ritual. Picture yourself there. Crowds gather in the square, where jesters perform silly dances, mock trials are held against imaginary villains, and even animals are dressed in costumes. A cow might wear a crown, a goat might be paraded as a knight. The absurdity only fueled the laughter, until the whole town shook with mirth. But there was also wisdom beneath the comedy. Medieval life was hard. Endless labor, fear of hellfire, and constant threats from nature pressed down on people's spirits. Without release, despair could consume them. The laughing day offered one sanctioned rebellion, a day to forget, to breathe, to let joy fill the lungs instead of smoke or sorrow. Some accounts even suggest laughter competitions, villagers standing in circles trying to outlaugh one another, with the loudest declared lord of mirth. Imagine the chaos, grown men rolling on the ground, women shrieking with giggles, children howling like wolves. If you have ever laughed so hard you could not breathe, you know the strange ecstasy they sought. The church sometimes tolerated it, sometimes frowned upon it. Was it holy to laugh at death, or was it blasphemy? Opinions clashed, but the people did not care. For them, laughter was survival. Now pause and think, could you laugh for a whole day? No matter what happened, no matter who annoyed you, could you keep the joy alive from dawn to dusk? The medieval villagers tried, and in doing so, they reminded themselves that even in the darkest times, humanity can choose light. So next time you burst into laughter, remember, once upon a time, an entire village dedicated itself to that same sound, believing it had the power to heal the world. Imagine a field outside a castle, banners fluttering, trumpets blaring. You expect to see knights in shining armor, lances lowered, charging with thunderous hooves. But instead, the tournament looks different. A knight rides backward on his horse, holding his lance upside down. Another wears a pot for a helmet. A lady of the court charges into the field armed with a broom. Welcome to the Fool's Tournament. Unlike solemn jousts, this was a parody of chivalry. Nobles and peasants alike gathered to watch knights deliberately fumble, fall, and make fools of themselves. Squires tripped their masters, ladies mocked their champions, and horses refused to move until bribed with apples. It was a carnival version of the tournament, where skill gave way to silliness. Imagine the laughter. A knight tries to mount his horse but gets stuck halfway, legs kicking in the air. Another charges bravely, only for his lance to snap against a cabbage tied to his opponent's shield. The crowd roars as two armored men roll in the mud, wrestling like children, their helmets clanging like cooking pots. But beneath the comedy, there was meaning. The Fool's Tournament mocked the cult of chivalry, reminding people that knights were just men, not gods in armor. In a society where warriors were glorified, these festivals poked fun at the seriousness of battle and honor. They gave villagers a safe way to laugh at those who ruled them from horseback. Women too had their moment. Some festivals let ladies of the court fight mock duels dressed in gowns but wielding sticks. Crowds cheered as noblewomen pretended to defeat knights, turning gender roles upside down. For one day, strength belonged to laughter, not steel. Of course, accidents happened. Wooden lances still hurt, and falls could break bones, but that only added to the chaotic charm. The tournament was less about winning and more about laughing, a medieval version of slapstick comedy performed in armor. Think about it. In your world, sports are often deadly serious. Scores, trophies, glory. But imagine a day where the players wore clown shoes, tripped on purpose, and the goal was to make fans laugh instead of cheer. That was the Fool's Tournament. A reminder that even the noblest traditions could be turned upside down for joy. Now, if you stood in that cheering crowd, would you laugh until your sides hurt, or feel uneasy watching knights reduce their sacred code to a farce? Either way, the Fool's Tournament left a mark. Even today, when comedians parody warriors in films, or when costumed reenactments turn serious history into playful theater, we glimpse the spirit of those medieval games, where fools wore armor, and honor gave way to hilarity. The night is silent, the village asleep, then suddenly clack, clack, clack. A rattling sound breaks the stillness. Children sit up in bed, eyes wide as the noise grows louder. Out in the street, villagers march carrying bones, pots, pans, and anything that makes a hollow, haunting sound. Skulls knock together, ribs rattle in rhythm, and the procession fills the darkness. This was known as the bone-rattling night. In medieval Europe, sound had power. Just as bells drove away storms and demons, bone-rattling parades were believed to chase off evil spirits lurking in the winter dark. People thought the clamor confused the dead, kept witches at bay, and woke up the earth itself from slumber. It was a ritual of noise, half terrifying, half hilarious. Imagine walking in that procession. You hold a cow skull, tapping it with a stick like a drum. Beside you, a neighbor clatters a string of goat bones. Children bang pots until sparks fly from the handles. The sound is wild, chaotic, like a skeletal orchestra. At first you laugh, but then the night seems to shiver, as if something invisible is listening. For villagers, these nights were both entertainment and protection. In the silence of medieval winters, fear was a constant companion. Wolves howled beyond the walls. Plague stalked unseen, and the dead were never far from thought. By making noise, people felt they pushed back against the void. Bone rattling was courage made audible. But of course, it was also fun. After the procession, people often gathered to drink and sing. Their fear transformed into celebration. Some even wore bones as costumes, dancing grotesquely while neighbors laughed. Picture a farmer with ribs strapped to his chest, clattering like a skeleton every time he moved. The absurdity made the horror bearable. Not everyone approved. Priests complained that bone rattling mocked holy processions, turning sacred ritual into noisy carnival. Authorities tried to ban the practice in some towns. But bans rarely worked because when winter nights grew long and heavy, people needed sound, laughter, and a bit of madness to survive. If you stood in that village, would you have joined the parade, banging a skull like a drum? Or would you have hidden indoors, peeking through shutters, wondering if the noise kept spirits away or summoned them closer? Today, echoes of bone-rattling nights survive in traditions like Halloween trick-or-treating, noisy New Year's celebrations, and even Dia de los Muertos with its skull imagery. They all come from the same ancient instinct, to laugh at death, to rattle fear until it runs, so the next time you hear bones in a horror movie soundtrack, remember, once upon a time, entire villages made that sound on purpose, turning fear into music under the winter moon. The bells toll, villagers pour into the streets, and a hush falls as monks emerge from the church, in their hands gleaming in golden cases or wrapped in silk. Are bones, fingers, skulls, even whole arms. The crowd kneels, crossing themselves, whispering prayers. Then the music begins and the relics are paraded through the town like royal treasures. Welcome to the Saints' Relic Parade. In the Middle Ages, relics were power. A single bone of a saint could bring pilgrims from miles away, filling churches with offerings. Relics were thought to heal the sick. protect against plague, and even guarantee victory in battle. So when relics were carried through the streets, it was more than ritual, it was hope made visible. Imagine villagers pressing forward, desperate to touch the glass case that held a saint's rib. Mothers lifted babies toward it, believing one touch could keep fevers away. Farmers brushed their hats against it for luck in the fields. Some wept openly, convinced they were in the presence of holy power. But not all was holy. Alongside genuine relics, countless fakes circulated. Traders sold saints' bones carved from animal remains, or splinters of wood claimed to be from the true cross. Entire parades might revolve around objects of doubtful origin, yet people believed because belief itself gave comfort. The parades were also theatrical. Monks in embroidered robes, choirs chanting incense filling the air. It was a show of sacred pageantry. In some towns, relics were decorated with flowers, jewels, or even costumes, turning holy remains into dazzling icons. For the faithful, it was awe-inspiring. For skeptics, perhaps a little macabre. Picture the contradiction: bones of the dead, symbols of decay, carried like treasures through streets lined with cheering crowds. It was both eerie and beautiful, a reminder that life and death, sacred and strange, were inseparable in the medieval mind. Of course, the church defended the practice, though scandals emerged. Bishops argued over who had the real skull of a saint. Sometimes two towns claimed the same relic. But for ordinary people, the disputes did not matter. What mattered was the moment when the relic passed by, and they felt closer to heaven. If you had been there, would you have reached out to touch the relic, believing in its power? Or would you have hung back, uneasy at the sight of bones paraded like trophies? Today, relic parades survive in parts of Europe and Latin America. Statues of saints are carried on shoulders, kissed and decorated, echoing the medieval passion for sacred display. The costumes may be cleaner, the reliquaries brighter, but the need to see faith made visible is the same. So next time you see a religious procession, imagine it centuries ago. Bones swaying in golden cases, incense thick in the air, villagers crying with both fear and joy, because for one shining moment heaven walked through their streets. The wind howls through the trees, thunder rumbles in the distance, and villagers hurry to their doors whispering prayers. Suddenly horns echo across the sky. Riders appear, dark silhouettes with glowing eyes, hounds baying with voices not of this world. They gallop through the storm, cloaks whipping like wings. Their leader crowned in shadow. This is no earthly hunt, this is the wild hunt. Across medieval Europe, people told of spectral hunters who swept across the skies on winter nights. Some said they were souls of the dead. Others claimed they were led by a god, a demon, or a cursed king. Wherever they passed, disaster followed, famine, plague, or death. But in some villages, instead of hiding in fear, people tried to tame the terror by turning it into a festival. On certain nights, villagers dressed as ghostly riders, wearing antlers, black cloaks, and masks painted with bone-white faces. They stormed through the streets with torches, blowing horns, cracking whips, and unleashing hounds. Children screamed with delight and fear as the hunters chased them playfully. The wild hunt became both nightmare and carnival, a way to laugh at the storm that could so easily destroy them. Imagine being there, the sound of horns shaking your chest, the torchlight casting monstrous shadows, neighbors disguised as spirits of the dead. One moment you laugh, the next you shiver, unsure if the riders are truly your friends, or if the real hunt has joined the game. That uncertainty was part of the thrill. The festival was also a warning. By reenacting the wild hunt, villagers reminded one another of mortality, of the thin line between life and death. The message was clear: the storm is coming, the dead are near, live fully while you can. Scholars suggest the wild hunt tradition drew from Norse and Germanic mythology, where gods like Odin led ghostly riders. Over time, Christianity layered new meanings. The hunt as a punishment for sinners, or as wandering souls trapped until Judgment Day. But whatever the origin, its power lay in spectacle. To see riders tearing through the night, whether real or pretend, was unforgettable. Of course, danger was real too. Torches sparked fires, horses bolted, and sometimes the play turned violent. Chroniclers note injuries, but they also note the strange devotion people felt. Better to risk bruises in the festival than to live in silent dread of the storm. Now ask yourself, if you heard horns in the wind, would you laugh, knowing it was only your neighbors in costume, or would your heart race, fearing you had glimpsed the true hunt, riding with death at its heels? Even today, Stories of ghostly riders persist in Halloween parades, in tales of headless horsemen, in movies where death gallops on horseback. All echo the medieval wild hunt, that terrifying, thrilling blend of myth and festival. So the next time a storm rattles your windows at night, imagine hooves pounding in the sky, hunters racing through clouds, and ask yourself, are they just a story, or are they still out there chasing souls across the dark? The cathedral bells ring, but instead of solemn hymns, laughter erupts. Priests wear donkey ears, choir boys dress as bishops, and the altar is turned into a stage for jokes. People dance in the aisles, wine flows where holy water should be, and a donkey is led right into the church to bray at the altar. Welcome to the infamous Festival of Fools. In the Middle Ages, this was one of the most outrageous traditions. For a day, sacred order collapsed. Clergy mocked their own rituals, singing nonsense songs, sometimes even eating sausages at the altar during what was supposed to be a mass. They paraded through the streets in costumes, crowned a lord of misrule, and reveled in parody. Imagine the sight: a priest standing on the pulpit, delivering a sermon made of jokes and rhymes, a bishop's mitre placed on a pig's head, choir boys singing bawdy songs at the top of their lungs while the congregation howled with laughter. It was half comedy show, half rebellion. Sacred spaces turned inside out. Why did such a scandalous festival exist? Because even the most devout needed release. The church dominated every corner of life with rules, rituals, and constant reminders of sin. The Festival of Fools gave clergy and commoners alike one sanctioned chance to laugh at themselves and their faith, without being branded heretics. But it was also dangerous. The church hierarchy grew uneasy with such chaos. Was it harmless fun or mockery of God? Councils condemned the festival. Laws tried to ban it, yet it endured for centuries. Because for ordinary people, the joy was irresistible. To see priests behaving like jesters was to taste freedom in a world of obedience. Picture yourself sitting in that cathedral, pews shaking with laughter, incense replaced with the smell of roast meat, the choir dancing like fools. Would you join in, clapping and cheering, or sit frozen, wondering if lightning would strike the building? The Festival of Fools blurred the line between devotion and parody, showing that humans could not survive on solemnity alone. They needed laughter, even in sacred places, and maybe in some strange way, the laughter itself was a form of prayer, a cry of joy to balance all the tears. Echoes of this festival survive today in carnivals, Mardi Gras, and parades where rulers of chaos are crowned for a night. Every time the powerful are mocked with satire. Every time order is overturned in laughter, the spirit of the medieval fools lives again. So next time you see a parody of something serious, remember, in the Middle Ages, even the altar itself was not safe from laughter. For one day, chaos wore the crown and the fools became holy. The summer of 1518 in Strasbourg began like any other, until one woman walked into the street and started to dance. No music played, no festival had been planned. Yet she spun and stomped hour after hour, until neighbors gathered in awe and confusion. Soon others joined her, 10, 20, 50 people, all moving as if possessed. Days passed, the streets became a stage for madness. This was the dancing plague. Though not a festival in the official sense, medieval villagers treated it like one, because how else could they understand it? To them, it seemed like a curse, or perhaps a dark celebration forced upon them by unseen powers. Musicians were even hired to play, not to stop the dancers, but to keep them moving, as if performance itself might exhaust the sickness. Imagine the horror and fascination. People collapsing from exhaustion only to rise and dance again, bodies drenched in sweat, feet bleeding. Faces twisted in joy and agony at once. Some laughed as they danced, others screamed. Chroniclers wrote that dozens, maybe hundreds, were caught in the frenzy. Some even danced themselves to death. Why did it happen? Theories abound. Some blame ergot poisoning from moldy rye, which caused hallucinations and spasms. Others think it was mass hysteria, born from stress of famine, plague, and despair. But for those who lived through it, explanation did not matter. What mattered was the sight of their neighbors trapped in a rhythm they could not escape. Villages tried to frame it in religious terms. Some believed Saint Vitus, patron saint of dancers, had cursed them, so processions and prayers were held. Others thought demons were at work, and exorcisms were attempted. Yet still the dancers twirled, as if mocking every attempt to stop them. Picture yourself watching, Would you laugh at first, seeing someone dance without reason? Would you step closer, curious, only to feel your own feet twitch? Would you join the crowd, unable to resist, until your body betrayed you? That was the true terror. The line between spectator and victim was frighteningly thin. The dancing plague eventually burned out, as suddenly as it began. But its memory haunted Europe. It was both comedy and tragedy, festival and nightmare. For medieval minds, it proved that unseen forces ruled the body as well as the soul. Today, the story echoes in culture, from horror films to flash mobs, from medical studies of hysteria to jokes about dancing fever. It reminds us that joy and madness are often separated by only a few steps. So the next time you find yourself swept up by music, tapping your foot without thinking, remember Strasbourg in 1518 and ask yourself, if the music never stopped, how long could you dance before you broke? The great hall glows with candlelight. Tables groan under roasted meat, steaming stews, and overflowing jugs of ale, but something is strange. At the head of the feast sits not the lord of the manor, but a servant in patched clothes wearing a paper crown. The nobles bow and serve him food while the real lord laughs in the background. Tonight, order is gone. Welcome to the feast of misrule. This tradition turned hierarchy upside down. For one night during Christmas or New Year celebrations, a lord of misrule was chosen, often a fool, a servant, or even a child. They presided over the feast, issuing absurd commands. Knights had to dance like chickens, ladies had to sing bawdy songs, and the wealthy had to pour wine for the poor. Imagine the chaos. A noblewoman giggles as she serves bread to her maid. A knight tries to juggle apples while his squire laughs at him. The hall shakes with laughter as the lord slams the table, demanding everyone speak backward or crawl on the floor like pigs. For a few hours, power and dignity melted into absurd theater. But this was more than comedy. The feast of misrule served as a safety valve. In a society rigid with inequality, it gave the lowly a taste of power, and the powerful a lesson in humility through laughter. By mocking authority in ritual form, villagers and nobles alike reminded themselves that status was not eternal, but a fragile game. At the same time, the feast had a dangerous edge. Sometimes the jokes turned cruel, and drunken revelers forgot it was only play. Records describe fights breaking out, servants refusing to return to obedience, and lords uneasy at how much people enjoyed the reversal. After all, what if the laughter turned into rebellion? Yet the feast endured because it was irresistible. People craved the freedom to laugh at authority, to live in a world turned upside down. If only for a night, and perhaps the real lords secretly enjoyed it too. For one evening they could step down from their thrones, laugh with their people, and share in the chaos without losing their crowns for good. Now imagine yourself seated at that table. Would you obey the lord of misrule's ridiculous command to cluck like a chicken, or risk punishment by defiance? Would you laugh as your betters crawled on the floor, or feel uneasy watching order dissolve into farce? Today, the echoes live on in carnivals, office holiday parties, and even modern comedy shows where leaders are mocked and rules are suspended. The feast of misrule reminds us that laughter is a weapon, and sometimes the best way to survive inequality is to turn it into a game. So next time you see someone powerful ridiculed on stage, remember, centuries ago, entire feasts were built on the same idea, that for one night fools ruled the world. The square is crowded, torches blazing, drums pounding. At the center stands a tall wooden tower, and inside, hissing, clawing, yowling, are cats. Dozens of them. With a cheer, the villagers set the tower alight. Flames roar, smoke rises, and the terrified cries of cats echo through the night. Welcome to one of the darkest medieval festivals, the Battle of the Cats. Across parts of medieval Europe, cats were feared as symbols of the devil, witches, and misfortune. Black cats especially were thought to bring plague or curses. So once a year, people gathered to capture cats, stuff them into barrels, sacks, or towers, and burn them in public spectacle. To the villagers, it was not cruelty, it was a ritual cleansing, a symbolic victory over evil. Imagine the scene. Children cheer as sparks rise. Adults laugh nervously, as if fear is burning along with the animals. Priests bless the fire, declaring it protection against demons. For a moment, the village believes it has conquered darkness. Yet behind the ritual, the screams of the cats must have chilled even the boldest heart. Some towns staged mock battles, where cats were flung from towers and chased with sticks before being cast into fire. Others tied them to effigies of witches and set them ablaze together. The belief was clear: destroying cats destroyed misfortune. Yet not everyone approved. Some chroniclers wrote with unease, noting the cruelty. Cats, after all, were also hunters of rats, the very animals spreading plague. Ironically, in trying to fight evil, villages may have worsened their own suffering. Still, the ritual persisted for centuries, because fear was stronger than reason. Picture yourself there. Would you have joined the cheering, convinced you were purging evil, or would you have turned away, sickened by the sight? The answer reveals much about how humans cope with fear. Sometimes they laugh and burn what they do not understand. Today, the Battle of the Cats is remembered with horror, but it reminds us how festivals often mix joy and brutality, belief and cruelty. Where modern people see superstition, medieval villagers saw survival. So the next time a black cat crosses your path, do not fear it. Remember instead the villages that once lit fires to fight their own terror, and how far we have come in learning that not every shadow hides a demon. The winter air bites, yet villagers strip off boots and roll up their sleeves, gathering at the riverbank. Priests in heavy robes raise crosses high. Chanting prayers, then, with a great cheer, the crowd plunges into the icy water. Some wade carefully, others dive headfirst, shrieking with shock and laughter. Tonight, the river is not just water, it is salvation. Welcome to the Water Blessing Festival. In the Middle Ages, water was both feared and revered. Rivers could drown, floods could destroy, but water also cleansed, healed, and gave life. So once a year, often during Epiphany or midsummer rituals, communities transformed rivers, lakes, and wells into holy sites. Immersing oneself was believed to wash away sins, cure illness, and protect against evil for the year ahead. Imagine the scene: torches blazing on the banks, chants echoing through the night, steam rising from hundreds of bodies hitting the freezing water. Men emerge gasping, women wring out soaked gowns, children splash with wild joy. Some clutch crosses or icons as they swim, convinced the river itself is blessed. But the festival was not only about cleansing, it was also about courage. Diving into icy rivers tested the body as much as the soul. People boasted of their endurance, laughing at neighbors who squealed and fled the cold. For a night, suffering became entertainment, and hardship turned into shared triumph. Water was also thought to hold prophetic power. Some villagers filled jars during the blessing, keeping them all year as protection against storms or sickness. Others watched the way ripples formed, believing it foretold harvests and fortunes. In a world where fate felt uncertain, water was a mirror of hope. Of course, risks were real. People fainted from cold, currents dragged some away, and fevers followed reckless plunges, yet the danger only deepened the festival's magic. To risk death in water was to prove devotion, to dare fate and return reborn. Picture yourself at that riverbank. Would you step bravely into the icy flow, teeth chattering but spirits soaring, or would you stay on shore clutching a torch, cheering but unwilling to risk the plunge? Today, echoes of the Water Blessing Festival survive in Orthodox traditions, in midsummer swims, even in modern polar plunges for charity. Each carries the same spirit: the belief that cold water can cleanse not only the body but also the soul. So the next time you dip your hand into a stream, remember, once upon a time, entire villages threw themselves into rivers at midnight, laughing and shivering, convinced the water carried heaven's blessing. The marketplace bustles with noise, traders shouting, children chasing one another, musicians playing. Suddenly the crowd parts as men enter wearing goat skins, horns strapped to their heads and bells around their necks. They bleat, stomp, and leap, parodying goats with wild abandon. Women laugh until tears fall. Children squeal, and the whole town erupts in chaos. This is the goat-mocking carnival. Goats were central to medieval life. They gave milk, meat, and skins, but they also carried darker symbolism, associated with lust, mischief, and even the devil. Goats were both beloved and feared. The carnival turned this contradiction into comedy. By dressing as goats, villagers mocked the very fears that haunted them. Picture the scene: men crouching and butting heads, goat men stealing vegetables from stalls, one climbing onto a cart and bleating so loudly he startles horses. Women join in, tugging at beards and horns, pretending to milk the goats. The absurdity turns the marketplace into a stage where everyone plays along. The carnival often included mock trials. A goat, or a man dressed as one, was put on trial for crimes like eating too many turnips or tempting women. Judges shouted ridiculous sentences: to be milked in public, or to dance until dawn. Laughter rang out as the goat accepted his punishment with exaggerated despair. But beneath the comedy was meaning. By ridiculing goats, villagers symbolically ridiculed lust, sin, and the devil himself. In a world where fear of damnation was constant, laughing at the goat was an act of defiance. It said, "We see evil and we turn it into a joke." Of course, the carnival could get rowdy. Records mention drunken brawls, overturned carts, and goats running loose through the streets after escaping their handlers. Yet even the chaos was part of the fun. For one day, order gave way to bleeding madness. Now ask yourself, if you were in that square, would you laugh with the crowd as neighbors dressed like goats fought mock battles, or would you feel uneasy, sensing how close the comedy was to blasphemy? Echoes of the goat-mocking carnival survive today in folk festivals across Europe, where horned masks and animal costumes still parade through villages. They remind us that laughter is one of humanity's oldest weapons against fear. So next time you hear a goat bleat, imagine a medieval square filled with laughter, where horns became symbols not of terror, but of joy. The night sky glows orange as villagers pile wood into towering bonfires, sparks fly upward crackling like stars, drums beat, pipes shriek, and the crowd gathers in a circle. Then, with a great shout, a young man runs forward and leaps over the flames. Cheers erupt as he lands safely. Soon others follow, men, women, even children. Tonight, fire is not just danger. It is a test, a blessing, and a game. Welcome to the Fire Leap Festival. In the Middle Ages, fire was sacred. It warmed homes, baked bread, and lit the night, but it also burned crops, destroyed villages, and symbolized hell itself. By leaping over fire, people sought to tame its power. They believed it burned away misfortune, purified the body, and guaranteed fertility for newlyweds who jumped hand in hand. Picture the scene, a couple clasping hands, hearts pounding as they run toward the bonfire. They leap together, skirts and cloaks flaring in the heat. The crowd roars. If they land still holding hands, it means their love will endure. If not, well, laughter covers the awkward stumble. Children squeal with delight as they take turns jumping over smaller flames, while elders stand back muttering prayers to keep sparks from catching roofs. The air is thick with smoke, music, and the smell of roasted meat as families feast between leaps, but the festival carried risk. Skirts caught fire. Feet burned, and more than one reveler staggered away with singed hair, yet the danger was part of the thrill. To leap over fire was to prove bravery, to laugh in the face of an element both feared and worshipped. Scholars believe such festivals drew from pagan solstice rituals, when bonfires were lit to honor the sun and chase away evil spirits. Christianity later adapted them, but the wild spirit remained. For villagers, the fire was both altar and playground. Now pause and imagine, would you have joined the leap? Your skin prickling with heat, your heart racing with fear, or would you have stood in the shadows cheering others while clutching your cloak tight against sparks? Even today, echoes of the Fire Leap Festival remain in midsummer celebrations across Europe, in bonfire dances, and even in New Year's fireworks. The human instinct endures, to leap through fire as if we can outrun fate itself, so the next time you watch sparks fly into the night sky, remember once, entire villages risked burns and laughter in equal measure, believing that with one bold leap they could land in a brighter future. The long table is set, candles flickering, bread and wine laid out, yet the first seats are left empty. Plates are filled, cups poured, but no living soul sits there. Instead, the villagers bow their heads, whispering to unseen guests, "Tonight the dead are invited to supper. Welcome to the feast of the dead." In the Middle Ages, death was never far. Plague, famine, and war claimed lives constantly. To cope, many communities held rituals where the living feasted alongside the spirits of their ancestors. Chairs were left vacant, food placed before them, as if the departed truly sat among the living. Picture the scene, families eating in hushed tones, casting glances at empty chairs. A child whispers, "Grandfather is here." Someone swears they feel a cold draft brush their arm. At midnight, a toast is raised, not to kings or saints, but to the dead who keep watch in silence. The festival often blended reverence and humor. Some villages staged mock conversations with the dead, speaking for them in funny voices, making the table ring with laughter. Others grew solemn, reading prayers and reciting the names of the departed. It was both comedy and communion, grief and celebration entwined. The belief was simple. By feeding the dead, you ensured they would not haunt the living. By honoring them with bread and wine, you kept their blessing. Ignore them, and they might return in anger. Fear and love sat side by side at the table. Of course, not everyone was comfortable. Priests debated whether such rituals bordered on heresy, mingling too closely with pagan customs. Yet the people clung to the practice because it gave comfort. In a world full of loss, the Feast of the Dead said, "Your loved ones are not gone. They still eat with you, laugh with you, protect you." Now imagine yourself at that table. Would you sit in silence, afraid to disturb the invisible guests? Or would you laugh, clinking cups with the empty chair, daring the spirits to join in? Either way, the meal would linger in memory long after the candles burned out. Today, echoes of this feast live on in Dia de los Muertos in Mexico, in All Souls' Day traditions in Europe, and in family altars where food is still offered to ancestors. The medieval feast reminds us that death was never the end of community. It simply expanded the guest list. So the next time you share a meal, raise a glass to someone who is no longer here, somewhere in the long shadow of history. Medieval villagers once did the same, believing that laughter, bread, and wine could bridge the gap between worlds. And so, traveler, you have journeyed with me through the strangest and most haunting festivals of the Middle Ages, from laughter echoing in cathedrals to villagers leaping through fire. From feasts with the dead to battles fought by goats, we have seen how people of long ago turned fear, faith, and joy into celebrations that defy imagination. But before we close this story, take a moment with me. These tales are not just about history, they are about us. Humanity has always needed laughter to ease sorrow, ritual to face death, and festivals to make sense of a world too large to understand. In every fire, every mask, every feast, you can still hear echoes of the human heart. Now, I want to thank you for staying with me through this journey. If you enjoyed these stories, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves mysteries as much as you do. And tell me, which festival would you dare to join? Would you leap the fire, dine with the dead, or laugh in the festival of fools? Or maybe, would you rather just watch from the shadows? Let me know in the comments below. I love hearing your thoughts. Until next time, may your nights be calm, your dreams filled with wonder, and your heart open to the strange and beautiful stories that bind us all.